you might recognize Roz Chast as one of the prime cartoonists for the New Yorker. So if you like New Yorker cartoons, you will find that this is that style of, it looks very New Yorker, she has a very specific style of, what she does. And, that's Roz Chast. We can look up her biography another time. But what I'll do is we'll start. I'm going to share the screen with you. And we're going to go to here and share. Can everybody see the table of contents? Yes, just you can just give me a thumbs up and then let me know that everything's working. Excellent. So if you notice, it's a full-size comic. It's pretty thick. Actually, it's not just comic book, size, but it's a big book, and it's pretty big, and it's basically the story of the relationship that she has with her parents. Her parents are getting older, and they are of a certain demographic. She's of a certain demographic. They are in New York, which says a lot about who they are. And we'll start looking at it. But what I love right away, it sets the tone, is the table of contents right away has a cartoon on the side. Right? If you look, it says, what is all this? It's just a contents, George. Stop getting nervous in the service. Maybe I'll make some tea. Use the tea bag on the counter. You get a good sense of it still has plenty of juice in it, right? We can all relate to this type of couple, this type of individual. And it's interesting how right away in the table of contents, where you wouldn't otherwise see, right, any sort of content in an ordinary book, you just see the table of contents. She's inserting her parents as being the types of people. They're the types of people that insert themselves into everything that they do. And so, that's her parents. This is what they do. And they're the types of people also. What else do we know about them? They're the types of people that share tea bags, or that hold on to tea bags for a day or two or three. They leave a tea bag on the counter. When you need a little tea, you go get a little bit of tea. So right away, we get a sense of who these people are and what they're doing. So, here's the introduction. I skipped the title pages for the introductions. I just gave the content. It was against my parents' principles to talk about death, nor would they discuss religion, but on a more superficial level. We all know people like this. Also, I'm Jewish, daddy is Jewish, you're Jewish, end of story. This is her as a little girl. Asking too many spiritual questions meant you had too much time on your hands. It's navel gazing. People who said they knew anything for sure were either stupid or lying or crazy. When I die, I will go to Zoltan land. Zoltan said so himself. I'm on the 9th of Varbit's level. They're showing that there are people who are, parts of cults or part of alternative religions. This is, okay, those are people that we can leave them alone. Fanatics who want to kill people or aren't on their team. This is what different religions are all about. Finally, this were something besides this, we'd all find out soon enough. When you're dead, you'll know. Either there's something or there's nothing, probably nothing. And it sounds, funny and silly and a little whatever, but there's actually a lot of truth to this. And the author's inserting something very, very deep. Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, which is one of the major books of the Bible, one of the big books of wisdom, has a very famous saying that says what? Tov Shem Mishem and Tov, Yom Hamavet Miyom Hivaldo. Right, a good name is better than good oil, but the day of death is better than the day one is born. And as one of my professors always reminded me, that the day of death is better than the day one is born, because the day you're born, all you have is questions. And the day you die, all you have is answers. That's when you finally get to know what's going on in any of these answers. So that's where, when you're dead, you're no, so why bother asking questions about when you're dead? That's it. So by parents, you learn that death is something that you don't talk about in their household. Right. And interestingly, right away, the next page, right, this looks like a typical graphic novel. It's very, very similar structure, 6 panels. But you go to the next page, it's a lot of writing. And we see again that she's mixing up the genres. And on this page, she's talking about the fact that she almost had an older sister. The baby was born stillborn. It didn't have anything to do with the fact that she hurt herself when she climbed a step stool. That she climbed a step stool to change a light bulb, but the parents connected it in some way or another. And this is part of the family lore, and it's a very, very poignant image which you wouldn't otherwise associate with this type of cartooning that you see in the first page. Right, the style is clearly it's clearly her hand, but clearly the family has a hard time talking about death. They had a death in the family early on, a baby that was stillborn, right? And that's it. But quick, back to the humor. I was quite aware that my parents had had tough lives, way tougher than mine. You don't know what trouble is, right? I had heard the stories my whole life about how their parents had come over from Russia at the turn of the century with nothing, about how my maternal grandfather had been an engineer in Russia, but how between his inability to speak English and his being Jewish, he wound up barely being able to support 5 kids and his wife working as a presser in the garment district. It's New York, but we could really imagine that this is Montreal. And how bitter and angry he was, and how my grandmother washed clothes for other people, and how even sadder my father's family was. His mother was one of 9 children. Not only was she the only girl, but she was also the only one of her siblings to survive the Russian cholera epidemic. Oya chaleria. Right? Very apt for these days nowadays. Then her father's throat got cut from ear to ear in a forest by bandits. I don't know what happened to her mother, but she came to New York, married my paternal grandfather, and had just one child, my father, by cesarean section in 1912. A horrible ordeal which involved, according to my mother, opening her up from her neck to her you-know-what. Between their one bad thing after another lives in the Depression, World War II, and the Holocaust, in which they both lost family, it was amazing that they weren't crazier than they were. And you see a little image of somebody, a little Meshiga. Who could blame them for not wanting to talk about death? Let's discuss a more pleasant subject. So clearly she's setting the tone that death is an important part of the family's life, not because of the fact that they talk about it, but because of the fact that they don't talk about it. And they don't talk about it. Why? Because they led such hard lives, and this is so difficult for them to have. What's, again, another thing interesting to note stylistically from this novel, from this book, is that here we see their images there. It looks like a cartoon. Again, we have 12 panels instead of 6, but the images are there to illustrate really the words. It's more, this is a page where clearly this is a cartoonist working, but really has a lot of backstory to get through that isn't necessarily going to lend itself well to just being drawn, but she's okay with that, and she's mixing it up. And stylistically, I find that this is a book where right away in 4 panels, you have a table of contents that have cartoons that you wouldn't otherwise have. You have a typical page which you would see in a graphic novel, a page which is just with one small illustration, but with a lot of writing, and then something that looks like a cartoon panel again, but with a lot more writing than you would ever imagine. And the pictures are really just there to illustrate some simple things, and the words are just as funny as the images themselves. My parents refer to each other without any irony as soulmates. The rocks in his head matched the holes in mine. They were born 10 days apart, and they grew up 2 blocks apart in East Harlem. They were in the same 5th grade class. He was the fat boy in the back of the room. They never dated, much less anything else, anyone besides each other. We were too poor. Plus, we lived without our parents until we were married. So what I love is this up and down style that she has, where there's a lot of writing in the top, which is the exposition, and the dialogue she's able to get away with putting it right into the people's mouths and putting the image right there. Aside from World War II, work, illness, and going to the bathroom, they did everything together. I'm going to Waldbaum's. Hold it, I'm coming too. My mother even washed my father's hair for him. It's not as if they never fought, because they did. Don't sit sideways, you're twisting your kishkas. But the concept of looking for something better or being happy, that was for modern people or movie stars, i.e. degenerates. Elizabeth Taylor, 7 husbands, Gewalt. They were a tight little unit, codependent, of course. We're codependent? Of course we're codependent, thank God. They make codependence sound like it's a good thing. Maybe they believed that if they just held on to each other really tightly for eternity, nothing would ever change. Why rock the boat? Why roil the waters? Why rattle the cage? So again, you're setting the tone for who these people are. They met each other. They figured for the rest of their lives that they would be together, but not because they love each other deeply, right? That's what they do. That's a typical old world, understanding of how people should work. That's what they're doing. Okay. That's our introduction. Chapter 1, the beginning of the end. Right away, we see stylistically a very big difference. The pictures are bigger on the page. We're seeing the fact that she's trying to set up the neighborhood where she is and what's going on makes her need to draw this out a little bit more. They still have that style of a lot of words illustrating a few pictures, but that's it. The only things that you need to know about her childhood, she's an only child, and her parents were a lot older than the other kids' parents. And we see that in the image. And even when they were really a zillion, they and I never talked about the future. We're going to go to 100. Don't strain your voice, Elizabeth. Why tempt fate, right? This is this typical mentality. And as my parents and I moved inexorably into this future, I became more and more aware that at some point we were all going to have to deal with this aging thing. But they weren't asking for help, and I wasn't volunteering. In 1990, my husband, our 3-year-old son, and I, pregnant with our soon-to-be-born daughter, moved out of the city to the suburbs of Connecticut, where there was more space and greenery and good public schools. If doing right by our kids meant abandoning my then 78-year-old parents, so be it. The longer we were there, the more impossible schlepping into Brooklyn seemed. If they wanted to see us so damn much, let them make the trip. And you're starting to see the relationship develop. And I really love this. This is really, we see what type of people the parents are. We see the type of person she is and she has become as an older individual, right? As an adult, she says, I don't need the hustle and bustle of New York or Brooklyn. This is the life that I had. And, this is who my parents are. And as typical for so many people, they say, listen, you want to see me? Come see me. I'm not interested in schlepping into Brooklyn to come see you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen just for a second, just so we can get back into this. Are there any questions or comments so far? I've been talking for a bit. I want to see if what people say or think about who these individuals are and what's going on. Margot, you seem like you have something to say.
I'm laughing. Okay. I heard cholera, hilaria.
Hilaria, exactly.
I love it. Who knew that? What a hilaria, where that word had never occurred to me.
You didn't know that. Yeah, hilaria means it's the cholera epidemic. We're going to call somebody now in Yiddish a coroner.
Pretty funny. It's pretty funny.
Somebody else had a comment.
Feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to speak. Or flag me and I'll unmute you.
Anybody? No? Okay, I can go on. I'm okay. Don't worry. I can keep talking. Oh, you have to give me back screen sharing. You unhosted me.
Oh, hold on.
Sorry for that. There we go.
Again.
Done. Let's go back to pick it up where we are. So, and again, we see this wonderful drawing, which in her style, which there's nervousness that exudes from her style, right? That Ra's talking about how the author, how she hated Brooklyn, right? I loathed Brooklyn, which is where they still lived in the same apartment in which I spent my unhappy childhood. The neighborhood was depressing. Their apartment was depressing. Who needed it, right? And you can see in this top panel here why she becomes a New Yorker cartoonist, because in one panel, right, you can see that she knows how to capture New York and Brooklyn specifically in such a great way. Grim dress shop, Elks liquors, smelly old groceries, and it feels a little run down. And you're going to see in a future panel that you're going to see the same image and it gets even more run down. I had no nostalgia for the carefree days of youth because I never had them, right? She didn't want to go back to Brooklyn because she just as much doesn't like the fact that that her whole youth is this horrible neighborhood and a house that is filled with worry. You see this young kid and you see her older, right? And she's basically the same person, just she's starting with a bit of worry when she's younger, and she skipped 2 panels later, right? Is worry, 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 worry. And if you look at what's going on, do well in school, practice piano, avoid contact with other children, of course, because, Corona, be good, look up the symptom in the Merck manual and don't die, right? This is the childhood that she had. Of course, she's not going to want to go back there. 11 years, you see, from 1990 to 2001, she does not set foot in Brooklyn. Denial, avoidance, all of this day-to-day busyness of my life, 2 little kids, cartoon deadlines, grocery shopping, all of this. The fact is, right, she just didn't want to go. But then she feels this intense need to go to Brooklyn to visit my parents. It was easy to remember the day of the events that followed, September 9th, 2001, a Sunday, right? 2 days before, September 11th, 2001. And up until now, we've had a fairly, like I said, it's been mixing stylistically what's going on. But we're about to go do something very interesting stylistically, because if this is a typical memoir, but remember, she's a cartoonist. She's a cartoonist for The New Yorker. She's a cartoonist. She wrote many other cartoons. She had many other series. She did Marvelous, which is a famous one. Anyways, you go to the next page. I had no idea what prompted this sudden urge to see them in their natural habitat. I got on a communitrator and I headed in. She sees herself and she looks at the World Trade Center, right? Yep, there they are. My approximate thought while looking at the towers for the last time, which of course I didn't know. She goes into Brooklyn and she says, it's not Brooklyn Heights or Park Slope or even Carroll Gardens. I'll translate for you Montrealers, right? She's saying, not the Brooklyn of artists or hipsters or people who made and bought $8 chocolate bars. She's saying, listen, this is not the plateau of hipsters, of $5 coffees on St. Viator and people lining up for bagels at 2:00 in the morning because St. Viator is open all night, and the fancy bars on Bernard. This is not that plateau in Mile End that we're talking about. We're talking about the deep plateau. We're talking about Henri Julien, and we're talking about Villeneuve, and we're talking about the city north of the area north of Van Horn, Park X, and deeper, further past, all the way closer to Christophe Colomb. That's the neighborhood that she's talking about. The Brooklyn of smelly hallways and neighbors having screaming fights, and where no one went into Manhattan, the city, unless it was for their job, a drudgery Inc. Right? So she's setting this whole thing up, and she drives down Ocean Parkway, and as she gets more into Brooklyn, right, the cab pulls up. I got out. She says, everything makes her closer and closer and closer back to the neighborhood that she lived in. It's bringing her back into exactly where she was. And this progression that the artist is doing, right? From a scene to a scene to a scene to closer to closer to closer, right? The plastic flowers in the alcove, the same chair and the same floor occupied by the same tenant still waiting for the mailman. The only thing that's different is the mailroom has a locked gate, the same elevator, the same weird smell, and you zoom in to her face. What awaited me, right? Time to face the music. So you've come to check up on the old folks. This is the old folks. And again, stylistically, we switch it up a bit. They learn about, you see an actual photograph and you have the dates, and this is who the parents are. The grime, right? This is such a great page, right? I would, if I had to take a page to remind myself to clean, right? I would take this page, I would frame it and put it in the kitchen or in the bathroom to remind myself what happens with grime. What is grime, right? Grime isn't just dust or dirt or a stovetop that hasn't been cleaned in a week. It's stuff that hasn't been cleaned in a long, long, long time, right? And the grime covers everything. We've all been to a house like this. Nebuch, right? It covers the cookie jar and the chairs and the knickknacks and the silverware and the books, and it's an up and down panel, right? Even though there's 4 or 5 different things, at the end of the day, it's the grime contrasts with the way that her mother used to be, and the mother used to be what? Somebody who dusted everything, because if you don't dust, the dust gets into all the interstices of the furniture and it breaks it all apart. It was clear that she had stopped worrying about the grime, right? This is parents that have let themselves go, right? This is a tipping point in somebody's life where when they go from being just merely old to being old and not thinking about the things that then caring about the things that they used to care about. They're aging in a point where things that they otherwise would care about they can't be bothered. It's too difficult for them, and they just let it go. And that's the grime. The grime is very symbolic. She spends a lot of time showing what the house used to be and what the house is now and what the house never will be back to again. What do? You can't do anything as a kid. And this, in 3 panels, you see everything that is very, very difficult. Because I know as a kid, if I went into my parents' house to try to fix something, they're going to go and say, right, don't do that. What are you doing that for? I wanted it like that. I wanted the light bulb out. I wanted this in this way. I wanted that in that way. I don't have to throw out all the papers. This is good and this is fine. We're fine, right? You can't be the perfect daughter. You can't be the perfect child by attempting to fix what is broken, because what happens if you fix what is broken is that you point out to the family, you point out to the parents that they have let themselves go. And there's a great difficulty in that. It's traumatic. And the trauma really, really shows in this page. And there's pushing back, right? She's getting angry at her, but that's holding onto something which is much deeper. She clearly goes back to Connecticut, and she calls the parents 2 days later after the World Trade Center is gone, right? I called my parents right after the second plane hit, and we move from this beautiful color single image to this page. What I love about this page, stop everything. If you forgot everything that you read up until now and you read this page, tell me what you guys think. And you can unmute yourself even though the screen is still on this panel, right? Tell me what you think. For those of you who it's a little small, if you're reading it on a phone, I'll reel it out for you, right? And we'll go 1 through 8. Are you watching the news? Yeah, the TV's been on all morning. Are you guys okay? Well, Mom and I are fine, but they closed the senior center on Ocean Parkway. Why? As a precaution. What do you mean as a precaution? A precaution against what? Does anyone really think the terrorists are going to dive bomb the senior center? So what are they going to do with all the old people? Just dump them on Ocean Parkway? That's just bats. People don't always act rationally in times of crisis. Also, maybe it's because of the word center, right? What I love about this panel is it's a standalone cartoon. If I pulled this out and I printed it as a cartoon about September 11th, it would be a funny cartoon in and of itself. It would be a good thing in the cartoon pages. Of course, years later, with enough distance that we can really, take time to laugh about it. But I love the fact that this is a daughter talking to her parents about the World Trade Center and how they got home. And what are you going to do with a bunch of seniors if they don't have the senior center to go to? And the father goes, well, people aren't rational. And, the word center, if they bomb the World Trade Center, maybe they're going to bomb the senior center. Centers are centers and they might get confused. And these terrorists, they're not so smart. Maybe they're going to bomb the center. Right? And it's funny in and of itself, but it's inserted the same way that she inserted a photograph, the same way that she inserted the story about her stillborn almost sister, the same way that she inserts various pieces. It's an insert that acts as part of the narrative, but just as much part of the rest of the story. 9/12/01, the same thing. I'll leave you a minute, 10 seconds just to get started on this, but this will act just as much as a funny cartoon as anything else that we've been looking at. So, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go to march right down to that Afghani restaurant around the corner and have lunch there. I want them to know that we don't think they're all nuts. Elizabeth, do you really think that's wise? Right? This is the parents talking to each other. The daughter's not even in the picture. What's not so wise about it? I'm in the mood for a little Afghani cuisine. But that restaurant's been there for 3 years and you've never been in now. Why now? I wasn't in the mood for it before. Now I'm in the mood. Don't be such a party pooper. I'm just using a little common sense here. In any event, if you go, I go. Right? We already learned that that's what they do. They do everything together. We can't just go in and we can just go in and get a takeout menu. Yeah, that's it. We'll just walk in, get a menu and walk out. Then I'm going to go say, hi, neighbor, and introduce us. Right. And again, this is a cartoon. that if you didn't know anything else about anything that happened until now, and if you let go of everything that happens up until now, it's a funny cartoon for the funny pages, for the comics section of the newspaper. All you need to know about this is that this is taking place on September 12th, 2001, 9/12/01. And it's funny because clearly she's trying to be neighborly. She's trying to say, listen, you're okay. You're one of the good ones. But it's funny because that's it. And it's a cartoon that acts, but in the context of this story, we learn a little bit about who they are, a little bit more. And it fits into the narrative of what this memoir is. And this is what I love about this. It's yet another piece that really adds to, everything that's going on. After 9/11, and we return back to the world of the book, as we can see, because it's in color, right? After 9/11, things quickly returned to the usual routine, with my parents fighting their usual battles. Bananas are disgusting. Bananas are nature's perfect food. This was depressing, but also reassuring, at least to me. Whatever marbles they ever had, I guess they still have, right? If your parents are still fighting, it means that they haven't lost any of their, which is funny, it's depressing, but it's funny. Nevertheless, by 2002, they were 90, and it was hard not to notice that every time I came to see them, the grime had grown thicker. The piles of newspapers, magazines, and junk mails had grown larger, and they themselves had grown frailer. I could see that they were slowly leaving the sphere of TV commercial old age. Spry, totally independent, just like a normal adult, but with silver hair, right? What we imagine, when I see that, this panel over here, I always think about the big billboards that you see outside the Cumming Center. And with good reason, right? The people that they're active, they're going to the gym, they're getting involved, they're doing art, they're painting, they're in the woodworking thing at the Cumming Center. They just have silver hair and that's it. And there's a recognition that not everybody is able to maintain that level of activity well into their 90s. And she sees that her parents have clearly entered into that level, that area of their life, that moment of their life. And they're moving into the part of old age that was scarier, that was harder to talk about, and not a part of this culture, right? 600 calories a day, live till 140, cry gently, right? All of this stuff that the doctors are promising that if you can do this, you could live to 100 or whatever. The fact is something was coming down the pike. It means that she is aware, right? That her parents are getting elderly, that it's getting close to the time when she is going to have to deal with their impending death. And it's going to sit on her to deal with it. And she is helping us realize, and we see that clearly this book, right? I'll give you a hint. I'll give you a spoiler, like they say. At the end, right, they both pass away, right, at different times, but they both pass away. And the fact is that this book is clearly her way of coping with it by turning it into something funny, by dealing with it, by poking fun at her parents, but also in a reverential way, in very, very funny sort of way. And so we can really get a sense that, she has a very, very specific form of humor. It fits very much into the model of that, like I said, the New Yorker cartoons. She very much fits into the typical stereotype, not even the stereotype, the history of Jewish humorists and the type of Jewish humor that is very, very typically Jewish humor. And she does it very masterfully in a way that really gives us sympathy for, we see basically three characters so far. And they're the same three characters for the majority of the book. Everybody else is just on the sides. They're really side characters. And you really develop a sympathy for her, for the nature of her life growing up and what it made her into. But you also have sympathy for the parents. Even though you laugh at them and you laugh at her, you really get a good sense. And she is, to me, the genius of this book is the empathy that we feel for the parents, the empathy that we feel for for Roz, and also at the same time, the ability to laugh hysterically at them, not just with them, but at them. And all of this comes because she has a voice, and that voice works on multiple levels at the ability to create a work of art that is both a cartoon, that is both words that are masterfully written, really, really capture something very interesting. It's very hard, I think, to make a voice sound so matter of fact and so easy and so natural. It's not such an easy thing to just sit and write that out, and also combine that with the visual that is very, very much in line. When you hear the voices talking, if you had to draw in something like that, you would imagine probably something very, very much like the types of images that she is putting up. And so, you know, I don't want to spoil the rest for you. Like I said, I really think that you should go and read the book. If all of you promise to come and read the book, and next time we can sit and discuss it, have a good conversation about it. But in the meantime, I'm curious what your comments and your thoughts are so far based on this. Don't all talk at once.
Unmute yourself if you would like to speak, or flag me if you want me to unmute you. I'm going to take us off of Facebook Live so that everybody is free to voice any opinions that they may not want to share with the world.